And one of the folks I have followed on Twitter is Kevin Williams, the great meteorologist at Channel 10, and who years ago worked with us here and has for a generation been a trusted voice about all things weather in our town. At any rate, Kevin's tweets I delight in because in addition to like, oh, here's the weather forecast, he gets in these little digs about man-made global warming. I'm not sure he's a firm believer in it. But every time somebody has some report about this, that, or the other, he sort of lays out some facts. At any rate, why leave it on tweet? To discuss the topic and just to say hi, we're honored to be joined by Channel 10 meteorologist Kevin Williams. How are you, sir?
Hey, I'm doing just fine. How are you today, Bob?
Awfully well, thank you. Awfully well.
Great.
Well, just a couple of things I saw here just a couple of days ago that the Secretary of the Interior supposedly made some comment about it didn't want any global warming deniers on the staff, that there was no room for that opinion in that agency.
Scary. Yeah, I heard that too. I didn't, I don't have the source, but I did hear that. I
also saw something a couple weeks ago, I think that you commented on, supposedly some new list of cities that are about to be inundated has been issued.
With the rising sea level, that thing?
Yes, sir.
Well, it's just very interesting. I mean, the sea level has been rising since the last ice age, a couple of millimeters a year. It's not uniform. Some parts of Alaska and Scandinavia are actually seeing the sea level drop, but there has been no acceleration of sea level rise in the past. In the record for that matter. So the news that the sea level is rising slightly is not something we were unaware of. But if there is some sudden surge that they're saying is going to happen or some acceleration, they have been predicting it in some circles, but it hasn't happened.
Mm-hmm. What is your view on global warming, please, sir?
Well, the debate has changed, interestingly, from man-made global warming to climate change, and I see it now beginning to evolve toward the idea of carbon pollution. Very interesting, because frankly, the Earth's temperature, best as we can tell, based on good data from the Hadley Center in Britain, peaked in 1998. Since then, the temperatures have oscillated somewhat, but basically are plateauing or have actually slightly dropped. Now, many of the UN computer models that they use predicted there would be a continued acceleration in temperature, and those models have completely failed. So, failing the fact that the temperatures are continuing to rise, we now find, that we're talking climate change. That is, any natural disaster can be in some way pointed to either directly or indirectly to, so-called climate change. But of course, the climate has been, always changing. I would suggest to you, if the climate were to stop changing, that would be the big news, because it's always changing. And the idea that carbon dioxide, which is kind of where they're heading now, is a pollutant, something that we exhale and is a plant food, and ironically helps keep our green planet green, is a bad thing in a reasonable amount, is just goes against science, and that's what I'm about science.
Sometimes, some glacier will retreat in some fjord in Norway, and they'll find some, village where people had once lived. And last week there was something up in the Arctic area where an Inuit village of a couple, 300-400 years ago had been discovered by the retreating ice. I always think when I hear about those things that the presence of man-made places indicates that in, the habitation of humankind, there once was no snow there or ice. And it came down, and now it's going back, seemingly in a normal fluctuation.
1,000 years ago, during the medieval warm period, Greenland was partly green. It's when the Norse settlers, the Vikings, arrived and colonized parts of Greenland before it turned colder and the glacier came back, and they were basically vanquished. The North Pole has been the last 100-plus days below normal in temperatures. And I think one of the good examples here is Mount Kilimanjaro, where, the thought was the receding ice cap on the mountain was largely the result of a rise in temperature, when further research showed what actually was happening was the clear cutting of nearby rainforests was diminishing the amount of moisture in the air, diminishing the amount of precipitation, diminishing the amount of snow cover on an annual basis, and that proved to be the bigger issue, as an example.
So there wasn't temperature, it was precipitation.
Right. You have to dig deeper. It is not so simple, and I just think that's a good example. Yes.
Some folks say, well, soon we will have a northwest passage because of thawing of the North Polar ice cap. And they say, well, we've got these massive chunks of ice breaking off at the South Polar ice cap. What about the ice caps, sir?
Antarctic ice is way above normal. They refer to one little peninsula that sticks out. Antarctica is huge. It would be like saying, picking one spot in the U.S., Phoenix, and suggesting that is representative of North America. It surely isn't. North Pole, the ice has been thinner. But it is not. It has actually been rebuilding. The summer ice extent is well above where it was last year, suggesting again these natural oscillations that are part of the climate machine.
So, and again, the deal we touched on earlier, and I'm not good at asking these questions in a logical fashion or order, but the only problem right now with the concept of global warming is that the globe isn't warming.
The globe is not warming at this point, and the predictions of increased natural disasters are not panning out. For example, I'm just pulling a note here from tornadoes, for example, in the U.S. There was the suggestion that the increasing heat and humidity would lead to an increasing number of tornadoes. Well, so far this year, roughly, there have been 600 tornadoes nationally. The average is 1,200. The thought was that natural wildfires would be on the increase, given the increased heat and evaporation. Well, as it turns out, according to the National Fire Agency, there have been, and this sounds like a lot, there are currently 30,000 fires underway in the U.S., or there have been to date. Well, that's an impressive number, but when you point out that the average is 51,000. The acreage consumed by those fires so far has been 3 million. Again, an impressive number, but 5 million is the average. So in some of the predictions of calamity have actually gone the other way, and our weather has, in the overall scheme of things, been tamer.
We're speaking with Channel 10 meteorologist Kevin Williams about global warming. There is this, orthodoxy or homogeneous view across all the sciences. It seems that's all. They all swear global warming, man-made global warming, is taking place. If you pick up, National Geographic magazine, or if you listen to, Science Friday on NPR, or if you go to Scientific American, it seems like half the stories are in some way the evils of man-made global warming.
I know.
What's the scientific community doing here, please, sir?
Well, I'm reminded of a great quote from Michael Crichton on this about consensus. And he said, historically, the claim of consensus has been the first refuge of scoundrels. It is a way to avoid debate by claiming that the matter is already settled. For example, there was a time when scientists believed, there was a consensus who believed that the Earth's continents were static. They didn't move. And lo and behold, a group came along and said, wait a second, we think they do. And they showed evidence, and the field of plate tectonics was born, and now it's universally agreed to that the continents shift, and they have in the past, and they continue to do so. More recently, on the medical side, there was medical consensus that peptic ulcers were the result largely of stress. And recently, in the last year or two, I believe, no, that consensus was proven wrong. It was actually a bacterial infection that results in many of the peptic ulcers. So when you hear...
The example I think of from history is, and I always confuse these two fellows, Copernicus and Galileo, but, there was a concept that the Earth was the center of the cosmos.
True.
And,
Copernicus.
People taught
Changed that, right?
different
Right.
At peril of their life. The church, the political structure of the day, and all the so-called scientists of the day, marched to that tune. And again, those who deviated from it or postulated differently met with persecution and in some instances loss of life. I think that's where we are.
Yeah. Copernicus was the one who proved that wrong, I do believe. It's a little scary. Science is about facts. It's about observations. It's about trying to test your hypothesis and advance a cause and not group think. And that's a little bit of what we're seeing in some circles today.
100%. Could you hold on a moment, please, sir?
Sure.
I so appreciate it. We're speaking with Kevin Williams, and we're talking about man-made global warming and this interesting phenomenon all around us where the politicians, the school teachers, the activists, the presumed scientists, they all are hopping up and down saying this is happening in our entire society, in our economic structure. The quality of our lives must be adapted and changed to forestall impending doom. But some folks say it just ain't so. Kevin Williams is one of them, and he's pretty knowledgeable and educated. We'll get back with him in a moment. If you have questions, I'm sure he'd be glad to take them on Wham 1180. We're talking with Channel 10 meteorologist about global warming. So here's the deal. Why are they doing that?
Well, I don't want to get too heavy into the politics. I'm all about science, and others bring up the politics. But I did come across an interesting quote from one of the participants in the United Nations IPCC International Panel on Climate Change. The quote was, this is from CFAC.org, the quote is, "One must say clearly that we redistribute the world's wealth by climate policy." So it's not me talking, it's an interesting quote, I thought. So
by crippling the economy of the United States through depriving it of energy.
You know, Bob, there are some very serious environmental world problems. Water, pure water, for example, is really a serious problem, and I would even be, if they wanted to tackle a demonstrable problem like that, okay, but the idea of this, using this topic to achieve other means is certainly raises questions in some circles.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a fundamental deception. It's a manipulation. The one thing I worry about is we have here the natural process of climate change, if that's what we call it, going on. It seems like scientifically, instead of exploiting it for a political and social engineering end, we should probably study it. I imagine it's a pretty fascinating phenomenon, I would think. Are you there, sir?
I can hear you, Bob. Sorry, I couldn't hear you for a while.
No, I apologize. We got a wrong button pushed up here.
Okay.
My question was, instead of the scientific community, exploiting this phenomenon for political and social engineering ends, it seems like it ought to instead be scientific and study it, because I imagine it's a fascinating natural process.
It is. It is. And I there are those who do that. There are some great scientists out there: Joe DeLeo, Bill Gray, Pat Michaels, Roy Spencer, Richard Lindzen, at fine universities that are. Well, they're voices in the wilderness sometimes, but there are people doing that. It's getting that side out that can be sometimes challenging.